Let's go.
Welcome to the Soul Fam podcast, where we expand your personal universe. I'm Diana Marquetta, and in each episode, Soul Fam co-founder, co-creator Lexi Strummer-Solden and I interview the world's most rising and longtime experts in consciousness, spirituality, entertainment, healing, and science. From Earth's dimensions and dimensions way, way beyond. On the Soul Fam podcast, our frequencies are high and your heart chakras will open as these powerful voices of today share cutting-edge research, profound experiences, and valuable knowledge for your world in this out-of-this-world, thought-provoking, envelope-pushing interviews that could only take place right here on the Soul Fam podcast. Welcome to the Soul Fam podcast. Today, we interview Rebecca Haywood. Rebecca is an expert, in my estimation, and a passionate teacher of ancestral trauma release and a divine guide in the feminine power of today. Welcome, Rebecca. I am very aware of your talents and expertise and all of the history that you've had and the work that and I was hoping you could share exactly what it is you do, where your passions come from, and a little bit about your background and story, and why it's so important today that we work with our ancestral trauma and to release it all right now.
So, my background, sort of in a nutshell, I call myself a Nagual healer. Now, Nagual is a Toltec word. That's my lineage, Mexican Indian Toltec. And Nagual is sort of similar to how we use the word shaman. But it translates, according to my teacher, Don Miguel Ruiz, and his mother, Madre Sarita, translates as the space between, the space between the stars. So in that way, I really sort of come from that realm of ether and bring that energy and bring that channel in to all aspects of our human experience, from the physical and emotional to the mental and the spiritual, and really weave those together with that etheric awareness. In the Toltec journey, we really revere eagle medicine, right? Because the eagle is this hunter and also is of the sky, of this breadth of vision. So we bring that in as a Nagual healer, where we can see from a wider scope to sort of tie together how your being, right, needs to find its equilibrium. What threads of the soul aren't quite present, what threads of the mind are contributing to dis-ease or imbalance in the body and in the emotions and even in the spiritual realm. So I call myself a Nagual healer. Some would call me a shaman, but Nagual is really my lineage. And my teachers, Don Miguel Ruiz, many know him more than they know my grandmother, Madre Sarita. He was the author of the 4 Agreements and the Mastery of Love and the 5th Agreement, and it goes on and on. So I came to them when I was a young 20 years old, and had already been dreaming with his mother, Madre Sarita, who was a world-renowned healer, Nagual healer, who could make paralyzed people walk, blind people see, just amazing work that she does. And she's no longer with us now, but she asked me to carry on her lineage of healing. And she asked me to do that in a very specific way. She said, Mija, the one who combines what I do with what Miguel, my son, does, will be the best healer. And that's when I began to study with Miguel and really embrace that aspect, which I was already noticing in Sarita's clients, right? Of no matter how deep the miracle went in them, where they would walk out the door completely cleared of any imbalance, they could easily come back in a month, 3 months, a year, having recreated either the same imbalance or some version of it. And I saw that this was so much to do with the mind, the beliefs in the mind, and even more so, the emotional addiction, right? The emotional addiction to suffering or victim stance, or as we're going to talk about today, trauma, because trauma is a very specific frequency in the body and its own sort of emotional cocktail, if you will. And that becomes a habit in the body. It's not just a cellular memory, right? But it's also a habit in the body that we sort of develop a taste for that. And like any addiction, we need to have the tools to start to refrain from feeding those emotional channels in the body, heal those mental aspects that are contributing, and give it a new vibration, a new frequency. And that requires, other tools and rituals and healings that can start to strengthen that. I don't like to use the words higher or lower, but that other frequency of love in the body.
That I don't know about you, Lexi, but I really resonate with that sense that there's a sort of chemical compound of trauma that runs through the mind and seems to attach to the atoms and neurons and firing systems that suddenly becomes familiar when I get just even an essence, even a little sound of that trauma coming back.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, we've all read studies that show that actually ancestral trauma is passed down through DNA. So depending on your background, you have your ancestors' trauma and their pain and hopefully some of their stories. But if you are, let's say, I don't know, living in the United States, diaspora from some other country, you came over as a refugee for whatever reason. My family came from Ukraine and Russia about 100 years ago. There are some people, there's ancestors who we don't know who they are. So the trauma attached to them is the not knowing. And I think reframing sounds really, really wonderful. And I could see how one could do it when you know what the trauma is or you know who the people are. But for me, the biggest challenge in ancestor work has been the holes in the story. And I know I'm not the only one to have experienced that.
And yet, I know that this is sort of the journey that many are on in today's spirituality of, we have to develop, and even in Miguel's teaching, it's the mastery of awareness before the mastery of transformation, right? So we have to sort of be able to name it so that we can claim it, right? And then reframe it, right? And this is one way. This is one way. And it's, to me, sort of the slow way. And it's a challenge, right? Because like you're talking about in the ancestral healing, we don't always have the awareness of those stories, right? And so, there's good news and there's bad news here because trauma does live in the body, right? It lives in the body. So truly, no matter how much we change the story, right? And rearrange the furniture up here, right? Until we really develop and embody this human experience and we develop a deep connection with our body, we're not really going to be able to change that. We can create a beautiful story, and that will start to shift the frequency that we're feeding the body, right? But like you were sharing, Diana, one smell, one sound, one way of touch can suddenly bring us that trauma response, right? Into that trauma response. And if it's ancestral, we're looking for all the ways into that of going, okay, I'm safe. I'm okay. This is done. This is over. But the body doesn't know that time, right? That body doesn't ascribe to time zones. And with trauma, we could be 3 years old in one moment, 14 years old in another, 30 years old in the next, you see. So that trauma memory in the body, and I speak from personal experience, every healer develops their calling by their own journey of suffering, right? That's something my grandmother used to say. Every healer, often has great suffering in their young life, and that's to develop the compassion for those they're meant to serve. They're meant to serve their calling. And for me, it was sexual trauma from a very young age and throughout my life. It followed me even what I call post-enlightenment. And it was so perplexing to me of, why am I continuing to create this, right? This was part of Miguel's teachings, is to own everything that comes into your life. Everything is your creation, right? And so I was very much taking responsibility for how and why I was continuing to attract new trauma into my life, even after, I had really shifted my assemblage point. So I was no longer experiencing PTSD. I wasn't having any of those responses. And yet this trauma was continuing to come for me. And there were a few reasons for it. It was because I needed to develop my calling to heal sexual trauma, help others heal sexual trauma in a deeper way, right? The way I was doing it up until then was very much bringing people on this journey of shifting their assemblage point, meaning I am not my body. I am not my emotions. I am not my story, right? And when we shift that, yes, we can get a respite from even the cellular memory because we're not identifying as it. However, what I found was that the animal, the body, was still having its experience, right? And that's what needed tending, right? I needed to actually be more embodied in this human experience, not less. So though I was really grateful for that muscle, to have that muscle, which I still have, to be able to shift that assemblage point, and I use it as a healer and as a human, as a woman in the world. And yet I'm so grateful for how my trauma kept calling me in. It kept calling me and saying, no, there's more here. There's another way here. And that's when I really started to do my work sort of all over again. It was a childhood trauma that I wasn't aware of, and it came for me. And so I walked through it in a very different way. Instead of shifting my assemblage point and sort of sidestepping it, I went right into it. And I developed a technique that I call walk in two worlds, the walk in two worlds, where I really embraced that little girl. She was 5 years old when she showed herself to me. And I just started to have a conversation with her. And it was more than just inner child work. She came to life, and I let her come to life. I let her have her emotional responses as a 5-year-old would. I mean, you can imagine the flood of emotions, a 5-year-old little girl who had been raped by a grown man, And so I walked with her as the guardian, which, not everyone has that guardian self so well developed. I was very grateful for my spiritual journey that had allowed me to develop myself as a guardian, as a point of reference for that little girl of pure love, and absolute presence. And so that's the walk in two worlds, the trauma self and the guardian self, to walk with the two hand in hand. And that little girl, she showed me her complete story all the way to the brink of her existential crisis. As a little girl, she didn't have a sense of sort of suicidal tendencies, right, but she certainly didn't want to be, right? And that's what she said, I don't want to be here in this world. And that's what so many are carrying in their trauma self. And this aversion to being human and to being in the world. And with that aversion, we sort of, part of our soul sort of breaks from us. Part of our self isn't present. And this shows up in us as depression, addiction, and even if you are able to sort of medicine that, right? And through coping mechanisms, defense strategies, right? We are really just overlaying that, right? And so we're able to sort of paint on the mask and even function, right? And sort of in a seemingly happy way, but our love and our presence is not quite complete. And so even in the subtle realms, maybe you're not experiencing depression or full-fledged addiction, but there's just maybe a fatigue that haunts you, or just like a pattern that you're noticing in your life, like I was, of just, here comes another trauma. Like, here comes another trauma. Like, wow, how do they find me? Do I have a sign on me? And essentially I did. As long as that vibration, that frequency was living in my cells, right? Like frequencies attract each other. And so that frequency of victim stance of trauma was attracting the predators, right? Just like a predator out in the wild, right? They see the wounded antelope and they hone in. So this walk in two worlds is something that I do with people now. And it's a really beautiful process. Like, I watched my 5-year-old grow up, from that moment of, I don't want to be here. And I said, of course you don't, sweetheart. And that's the key, is not to try and fix her, but to allow her, to allow her. And until she trusts you enough, right? She or he trusts you enough to really let you take their hand and show them the way. And that was an amazing night. Her existential crisis was really me holding myself in bed, crying all night long. Even as I slept, I woke with tears on my face still. And I told her, okay, like, are you ready to let me show you how to be here? And she said yes. And that began sort of her maturation. From that point forward, she showed me how she survived, right? So she showed me all her coping strategies and defense mechanisms, which was an amazing eye-opener for me. Because I did ask her, I said, well, how did you do it, babe? Like, how did you get through it? She said, well, nature. I would escape to nature. That was my refuge. I felt safe in nature, which I was such a tomboy. I was talking to the trees and the birds and the moon since I was little. And later through spirituality. And I'd never really thought of spirituality as an escape in my life, in my time. And yet I really saw for her it was. And so I said, look, I'm not going to take those away from you because they're beautiful. They're beautiful. And let's bridge them. Let's marry them with this human experience instead of escaping the body and escaping the feminine, right? Let's embrace. Let me show you how. So, I mean, there's so much I can go into with that journey itself of my personal walk in two worlds. But it's just been really enlightening. And each student client that I work with in this journey, walk in two worlds, it's different for everyone, right? Because like I said, the trauma self can be 5 years old in one moment, 13 years old in another. And wow, when my little girl got to her 15-year-old, and showed me her rebel, and that whole time, because that was another time where she encountered some severe abuse. And, it was a big wow and a big opening to see the rebel and the gift in the rebel, right? And to embrace that rebellion that said, I stand here for me. I fight for me. I fight for me. And I call BS on what's here. Like, I don't accept this world as it is. So I make my own. And so it was a process of really honoring her wisdom, right? Because she had great wisdom. And yet, of course, as a teenager, right, that rebellion was more of a reaction, right, than an embrace of love and a choice with awareness. So it was a lot of sort of making these choices again. And shamanically speaking, what's happening in that walk in two worlds is that we are rewiring those neural pathways very much at their core, right? Instead of coming in this way, we're coming from the body and allowing the old energy to sort of be exorcised, right? That was actually the title of my chapter in Shamanism in the New Millennium, was exorcising the ghosts of our sexual trauma and their secret shame. And it really is like an exorcism. And yet my hang up with that word is that I'm all about the alchemical embrace. So instead of this approach of trying to get rid of something, it's really about going in with love. And then organically that love begins to fill that neural pathway, and anything that is a distortion of love, right? Because I believe everything comes from love originally. Anything that is a distortion of that love can no longer live, right? It is transformed. It is alchemized. Yeah, so that's the walk in two worlds. Now, with that, I, of course, as a healer, use other techniques that I inherited from my grandmother to really assist the energetic work, and also to help people really develop themselves as the guardian. Like I said, I had already been walking my spiritual journey consciously for over 20 years at that point. So I was very developed as a guardian for myself. And so that's been a big part of the work, is to help people really develop that guardian self, that witness with the eyes of love. And so, yeah, some of those techniques are rooted in curandismo. You might be familiar with egg cleansing.
Oh, sure.
Okay,
why don't you explain it? Are you familiar, Lexi? I've had it done to me a couple of times.
Okay, yeah. So an egg cleansing uses an egg, a raw egg, still in the shell. And because the egg is a living being, right, which we give big thanks to that creation. But because it's a living being, it's polarized, it's magnetic. And so it draws draws the energy from the body, from the emotions, from the aura, the mental aspects, and it is pulling that energy from the body. So it's a cleansing, but it is also a reading, because it's not just taking an imprint of negative energy. It's taking a full imprint of your being, all aspects of your being. And so we then crack the egg into a glass of water, and then we can read it like an X-ray. But this X-ray shows not just the physical, it'll show the emotional components, the mental, the worldly. My grandmother used to actually sort of tell people's futures in these eggs. And it also shows the spiritual. And it's amazing, how well it works. Even without your faith, it works all on its own. I remember the first one I did on my mother, 20 years ago, and I was full of doubt. But she had just broken her leg. And so I said, well, let me do a cleansing on you and just, help move some of the pain and some of the inflammation. And she asked, well, what will it look like since I have a broken leg, And I kind of told her what I would expect. And sure enough, there it was. And it looked like, so the physical shows on the actual yolk. And it looked like a sculptor had come and just pinched a leg out of the yolk.
Oh, wow.
So you could see the kneecap, the leg bones, and then I could see the ankle, and there was a black line on the ankle. And I said, Mom, are you sure you don't have an ankle fracture? Did they x-ray your ankle? And she said, no, they didn't, but it's been really hurting me. And I thought it was just the boot they put my foot in. And sure enough, she had a fracture in her ankle.
Wow.
So it's a powerful tool that reads all aspects. And from that, we always do 3 egg cleansings because it's a process. And sort of peeling the layers of the onion with each cleansing. But the egg will also show us what is needed. And generally always, a fire cleansing is needed. And this is one of my favorite tools that my grandmother gave to me. And it's sort of like a smudging on steroids. Okay. It takes two practitioners, and one is holding a copalito, which is like a clay pot that we put coals in, and then we put 3 different incenses in that. So they're holding that and moving that to envelop the person constantly in the smoke of these 3 incenses. And then I take an egg and we rub that on them, and we go front to back, the person standing, we go front to back. And then we use a salt crystal. Some people know it as alum. Yeah, like the deodorant stones. Yeah. Well, before we used them for deodorant, we were using them for cleansing. And so then we do a salt crystal and we rub that all over the person. And then we use herbs that we also sort of sweep the body. Sometimes it can be a little more aggressive, cutting the cords and, and then everything gets burned in the coals. And my grandmother used to read the remains. I don't. My evolution of that technique has been not to go backwards, right? Because she would see all these things in the remains. But it's such an amazing release, this ceremony. Cords cut. It's great for forgiveness. It's great she used it for exorcisms, which, we have different points of view on that. The need for exorcisms, it's a little bit different in my point of view. But anyway, it's a very powerful ceremony. And so, I just found, and I would witness this when she would read the remains for people, because it was like the next week they would come back to read the remains, and it almost brought it back in.
Oh, interesting.
What least. Yeah. So it's, so for me, I don't read the remains, because it's complete, in the ceremony itself. Of course, the fire is with the person for usually about 3 days. They're sort of burning and releasing in that fire, and then I like to follow the fire ceremony with the soul retrieval ceremony, which is just exquisite. And this is something my grandmother didn't teach me. She told me about it in reference to children. And she said, Mija, sometimes babies, they won't stop crying, and they're misdiagnosed as having colic. But really, what is happening for many of these children is that their soul didn't come in with them all the way.
Wow.
And so they're crying out for their soul. And so all she told me, she said, so you have to bring that baby to the edge of the ocean, and you hold that child up and you call for their soul to come home. And so this is all I had to go on with soul retrieval. But I was noticing, and I don't know if it's just sort of where we're at collectively and in our human evolution and our cycle. But I was just noticing the need for this
right now.
More and more.
Right.
Soul retrieval, that there was so just trauma coming up for people, and just people not coming in all the way, or, this can happen with anesthesia where you don't quite come back all the way. It can happen with just a traumatic event. It can happen even just with losing a job, and it just accesses that part of you, that is traumatized, that does feel unsafe or abandoned by your parental figures. We underestimate the trauma of neglect, right? But it's actually on the hierarchy of trauma is neglect is the highest, deepest trauma you can have, even superseding physical, violent, sexual trauma, which amazed me to learn that. And yet it made sense for our modern world and how abandoned we do feel, how disconnected we feel from our divine birthright, right? And this world is just getting more and more, or it had been getting more and more jarring to our nervous system, right?
Very chaotic.
And so, yeah, of course, parts of us, and it's not that your whole soul leaves necessarily. It can just be parts of you where you just feel a little vacant, a little fatigued,
Fragmented.
a little less, yeah, fragmented. Exactly. Brain fog, executive function doesn't quite work as well. So the soul retrieval that I do it does involve water, and I use roses, different colored roses for each chakra. And we go through either we're by the ocean, or I've been doing it in Tonantongo Springs, where I'm actually going again in April with a group. We're doing Teotihuacan in Mexico, the pyramids there. And then we go to Tonantongo Springs, which is known as the womb of the mother. And I did this ceremony once there so far, and I'm going to be doing it again on this journey in April. And it's just so beautiful. We do it in the river. Her waters, she's known as the womb of Mexico. So there's just this beautiful mothering energy, mothering presence, and everyone's held in the water, just floating. And then we put these colored roses on each chakra, and we call the soul home through each chakra, so that we're really touching every aspect of the being. And really, they are sort of recommitting their vows in a marriage, if you will, between their divinity and their humanity, to become the guardian of each of those chakras again, and making their vow of intent, from each chakra. So it's a really beautiful ceremony, and I've done them here in LA on the beach as well, and just as beautiful, just as powerful. So, yeah.
So back to these times you were just talking about, how, we are going through so much change on the planet. There's so many well, they're not small, but I mean, on a personal level, there's a lot of change. So one of the messages that we've repeatedly got through some of these interviews is that some of us are sort of assigned to relieve the ancestral trauma for our particular lineage. Like, it's our job in the family for however many centuries to do that. I'm trying to pull this all together as a full circle question. So why is it now that this seems so, why are we at this pinnacle?
Yeah. Well, I don't pretend to know for certain, right, of the why of the now. I just know that it is now. And, we could attribute it to, the cycles, right, where we go through in the evolution of the whole, of the collective. And certainly from what I see is that we are being invited into a higher frequency. And in order to live at that frequency, right, we have to address these other vibrations that are still living in our cells, right? And if we are actually going to round that circle, or rather that spiral, I see it as a spiral of evolution, and really ascend that spiral, then we have to be willing and able to become a little bit lighter, and to let go of that baggage, right? That baggage. And what's beautiful, and that, some of the viewers may be noticing this, is that we're no longer just clearing our own trauma. And I'm not just talking about ancestral. Okay. So yes, we have our personal trauma. Then we have our ancestral trauma, which is also very personal. As Lexi was saying, it's actually inherited. It's studied, the science is epigenetics. So it's been proven that we have these emotional imprints in our DNA that remembers the same emotional responses, right? So that's where the trauma is sort of in our DNA. But it even goes beyond that, beyond our personal lineage. Okay, we're clearing our larger lineage, right? Because we weren't just born into this blood lineage, right? And my story is proof of that, right? I found my grandmother. I call her my grandmother, but I'm not Mexican. I'm as white as they get. And yet my soul remembered her, right? And her soul remembered mine. We've shared lifetimes together. Same with Miguel. We've been married in a past life, you know. Her other son, Jaime, was my father in a past life, you know. So we have to expand our viewpoint of what it means ancestral. You know, it's not necessarily just this line that you're living now. It's the line of lifetimes outside of this bloodline. It's the lifetimes of the feminine, right? And even beyond, you know, just because I'm a woman now doesn't mean I was always a woman, right? So I'm also clearing that masculine aspect of my trauma. I'm clearing being the predator as much as I'm clearing being the victim, right? And it's so important that we own this aspect, you know, and that, you know, I don't consider myself unique in that point of view that, you know, we hear it said a lot, together we rise. And when I say it, I mean together internally, my masculine, my feminine, together we rise. And it's so important to own that aspect of like, I wasn't just the one that was burned, right? The witch that was burned. I was also the one that lit the match, right? And we have to own that part in ourselves as well if we are truly going to, you know, transcend and rise up that lineage, up that spiral, right? So I see it more and more that people are coming, they're going, I'm feeling a trauma response. I've worked on my own, and they've even done sort of their own walk in two worlds through inner child work. And they're just stumped. They're like, I don't understand. I'm having these dreams. I don't recognize the people. It doesn't even feel like my lifetime per se. And, you know, and I say, well, it is, you know, the U is a capital U, capital Y U now. You know, what we are all clearing is for the we, and it's from the we. Right. So at any moment, you could be experiencing that trauma that has nothing to do with your bloodline or even a lifetime that you lived, right? But every dream that has ever been dreamt, every life that has ever been lived, every thought, everything is living. You know, it's in the air. We call it the Akashic records, right? It's living. And so at any moment you could be tuning into that. You could be tapped to say, oh, hey, you're nice and clear. How about you clear this one for the we, right? For the we. So I do see that, you know, to come back to your question of why now, why is it so up for everyone now? Because we really are shifting from the I to the we, you know, and this, you really saw it during COVID, where people really were coming into more of awareness of the whole, right? We were all going through this internationally. We were all going through this together at the same time. And it really heightened and strengthened and deepened our connection with that we, with the collective dream. And so, you know, whether you have the awareness of it or not, it's happening. And so, you know, I always say it doesn't matter. Mine, yours, ours, it's all ours. It's all ours. And so if you're noticing it, then give it your love. Give it your love. And no, you don't need to know its name. You don't need to know its origin. You simply need to have that guardian self present enough to hold its hand, to give it love. You know, it's the alchemical embrace. It's not this, you know, get rid of it, right? It's embrace it. And in that embrace, it becomes transformed, you know, and evolve. Yeah.
Beautiful. That's actually very different than some of the things I've heard. So that actually helps tremendously because it's not easy to shake some of these things. So better to embrace.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So tell me how you work with clients. Is it on an individual basis? Do you do a lot of group work? How does it go for you?
I do both. So I lead journeys. I facilitate journeys to Teotihuacan, Mexico, which is just 40-minute drive outside of Mexico City, and it's this beautiful. It's an old ancient mystery school. Basically, it's a city of pyramids and temples, and just an amazing container for this work. So I bring people on journeys there, and sometimes to Tolantongo and other areas, Oaxaca. So I love doing the group work, and I'll also do retreats, locally and within the U.S. So I love the group work. It's beautiful because everybody gets the benefit of everybody else's work, of everybody else's awareness. We really sort of meld into that hive heart and that hive mind. And so everybody gets that benefit, right? And yet, some really need that one-on-one. And so most of my clients are working with me in both capacities. They'll come for a series of healings one-on-one to prepare for a journey. And I also incorporate mentoring. Spiritual mentoring is key, because I never want to be someone's guru or even really someone's shaman. Like I want them to walk out my door with tools that they can sustain their own healing and continue to evolve without me, right? So I always incorporate mentoring sessions, whether they're working with me one-on-one in healing or they're doing some journeys and retreats with me. So I love both equally, and I really combine all of it. Yeah.
Awesome. How do people get in touch with you?
Yeah. So my website is just my name, RebeccaHaywood.com. And you can schedule a free consult with me on my website there. And, even if you have no idea why you feel called to work with me, that's fine. Schedule a free consult. We'll sit together for 30 minutes and sort of feel it out together of what your heart is really asking for. So that's the place to start. And from there, we sort of decipher, okay, like this woman, I just had a consult with her yesterday, and she was also in this place of like, I don't really know why I'm here. I just knew that I had to meet you. And so it just became very clear that needs to come to Teotihuacan, and she's going to come out here and get some one-on-one healing with me as well. So that's a beautiful place to start, especially when you're the big question mark, which is my favorite type of client to walk through my door. Because when we don't know, right, what are we doing? We're holding our hands up to receive, right? So I love the I don't knows. They're my favorite.
Yeah. Beautiful. If you don't mind me sort of, I know that you're having, and I'm bringing this up only because I know many of us can relate to this, that we have family members going through various things medically or physically or however it might be. Has that been helpful to you most recently in working with your own family? I think it's a good way for us to relate the importance of your work.
Yeah. My mother she is who you're referring to, and yeah, I just got back from Florida from being with my mother, who was just diagnosed with stage 3 dementia.
So sorry.
And so she's still very lucid, but very much stuck in the mind's rewind, right? And a lot of the sort of the executive functions start to fail. So it's really interesting with the work that I've done to be able to hold up a mirror with her, and the work that I can see, the work that I've done in clearing my own lineage, my blood lineage, specifically what I inherited from her and her mother. And I can see that she's revisiting these memories, but not like she used to, where she used to be victimized by them. She's there's life, there's love, there's appreciation, there's pride even. So where she used to, even before the dementia, be sort of stuck in this place of wounding with her own mother, I'm not getting those stories from her now. So it's really beautiful that, and this is the truth of ancestral healing, we're not just clearing it for ourselves, we're clearing it for the generations forward and the generations backwards. So even those who are no longer living, we're clearing karma, right? We're clearing their karma. We're giving their soul a new lease on their next life, right? So, it's just beautiful to witness that in my mother. Now, doesn't mean she's not having emotional turmoil still, right? She's still in a hard way right now. So, of course, she's having her own journey very much. And yet I can see where the wounding has been cleared. I can see where, I've got some work to do there, right? Yeah, like for her still with the masculine, really strong wounding with the masculine that I'm, sort of carried home with me, going, okay, like I see you and I embrace you and talk to me, show me. So I'm starting to walk into worlds again with this sort of mystery man.
Really interesting.
Because, he's that I know per se in my mother's history. There's one or two that I know of, but this is something older than that was there before these men in her lifetime came in. So it's so this is relatable that we are clearing it for our parents, our living parents. We're clearing it for our deceased grandparents, and so beautifully clearing it. I think most would expect for the future generations as well, that we are actually shifting, even though we inherit the wounding, if you will, the emotional patterning in our DNA. We are also rewriting our DNA as we live, as we breathe, as we love. We are rewriting that. So it's not etched in stone. People think of DNA as so fixed, but it's listening to you, and it's responding to you, and it's reorganizing itself and messaging based on the message that you are sending to your body and that you are inhabiting in your life. So we really are repatterning our very DNA as we heal trauma and as we heal our ancestral memories. We are really repatterning our DNA that it's not just that we're passing on a good, healthy domestication to our children. No, we're passing off good genes, good solid genes that are ready to receive love because that's what we've reprogrammed them for. Yeah.
That's really powerful. Really, really powerful.
Yeah, it is. It is.
I know we've got a kind of a deadline on this interview because you have other obligations today. Am I missing anything, Lexi?
Yeah.
No, I'm just taking it all in. And I was just again finding myself wondering, what if somebody wanted to dip a toe in? The idea of working with you, but it sounds like the free consultation is the way to do that. So I will definitely be doing that. And the other thing that I've been thinking about is when you said that lineage isn't only blood lineage, and it's something that one of my teachers talks about as magical lineage. So whatever you want to call it, energetic lineage. And I think that's really interesting because oftentimes we are drawn to different books and different teachers and writers and healers than maybe what our direct ancestry is. And I think that I think you're sort of saying that it's okay to listen to that and to study with those teachers and read their words if it's resonating.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think the biggest misconception that I just want to clear for people is that you don't have to go and do like past life regression therapy. You don't have to go into those lines in order to heal or to find out what it is that you need to heal. Everything that you need to know and to be aware of and to touch and to kiss is living here in your body now. Okay. So, I see a lot of people sort of seeking out past lives, almost creating more work for themselves than they really need to, So it's a big misconception. You don't need to. It will come for you. If you need to know something about another life you lived, like for me and my walk in two worlds, when I hit the teenage rebellion years, some information came for me because I kind of stalled out. My process had stalled out and I was sort of at a loss. She was sort of hiding from me and I was at a loss, and I went to dinner with a friend and was sharing what I was going through and sort of my journey with sexual trauma. And she said, wow, she said, what you're describing, it sounds like the Dakini. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Dakini. They were the priestesses of old, that their job was to take the battle out of the men. When they would come back from war, they would take the battle out of them. Right. Before they would return to their families. So they were often being raped and all of these things, or at least a violent interaction as the men were sort of exorcising the demons they picked up along their trails. And that was very much, even as a young girl, at age 15, after I had been raped then, and I had said, let me take it for them, meaning for the other women. Like, I'll take it for them so they don't have to. And I also meant for the men. There was some part of me that knew that somehow if I could receive this in a different way, not just become another victim, if I could receive this with awareness, and if I could somehow love them inside of this, that they too could be healed. So it was really a big part of my contract as a Dakini from another lifetime. Again, I didn't go looking for it. It came for me when I needed that information. So it was helpful. And that's what we have to trust, that Spirit gives us everything we need. The information that we need will come when we need it, if we need it. Otherwise, all we need is a deep connection with our body. Our body is where the trauma lives. Our body is where our ancestors' trauma lives. Our body is where the collective trauma lives. Okay? It's not as enigmatic as people make it to be. It's very accessible. And as I said before, we don't exactly have to name it in order to be able to reclaim it and reframe it. There are many ways to name something, okay? So it's not necessarily to know its name and to know its story and to know its exact point of origin, but to actually feel it, to find it in your body. Oh, wow, yeah, every time I'm, about to go out on a first date, I get this tummy ache, right here. It's like, oh, okay, well then here's a trauma response in your body. Let's go into it. Let's feel that. And let's put our hand on it. Let's let it know that it's not alone. Let's hold guardianship to that trauma response in this body. And then, it might have a story to tell you. It might have some memories to share with you. But either way, whether it does or it doesn't, it's already receiving the alchemy of your love. And that's what matters. I mean, the Beatles said it right. All you need is love, And it truly is all that I do as a healer is I love you. I love every inch of you, every cell, internally, externally, every star that formed you. I love you. And I let you use my eyes until you find your own eyes of love.
Beautiful.
That's what my grandmother did for me. And that's what I give to you. Yeah.
Love that. That's gorgeous, Rebecca. So,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you. Hopefully, I think our listeners will love this, and I think super curious to hear more about your journeys in Teotihuacan. And I have heard a little. I
Yeah.
had a friend who's a client of yours, so I know they're very powerful and life-changing.
We're going again in April. It's a longer journey than my usual ones. It's April 4th through the 13th. So if people are interested, it is on my website, RebeccaHaywood.com. It's also, you can find some reels about it on my Instagram, which is Nagual Heart. So I know that's a challenge for people, but Nagual is Nagual. So Nagual Heart. So you can find me there and check out some of the reels, check out some testimonials from other people's experiences of these journeys. And, I just invite people, even if they're not sure if this is the journey for them, reach out, get a free consult. Let's feel it out. If not this one, maybe it's another one, or maybe it's one-on-one. Maybe that's where you thrive. So, there's something for everyone in this, and these journeys. I just had a client send me a testimonial, and it was so sweet because she kept reiterating how safe she felt. And, that's something that, even Don Miguel Ruiz, he always said, you really embody the mother. Even when I was little, like 20 something, he said, you really embody the divine mother. And that is really just the gift that I feel I inherited from my grandmother beyond these techniques, was just this love. Like, no matter where you're at and what you're in, you're going to be held. You're going to be held, and you're going to be safe in that. Whatever you bring to the table, everything is spiritual. Everything is an invitation to be loved or to love, right? Everything.
Ooh, yeah. Everything. I'm going to take that with me for the rest of the day and really try to try it. Thank you, Rebecca.
Well, yeah. And, it's amazing, in that, since you're really connecting with that, one of the ways that I help people develop themselves as guardians, especially women, that they really connect with this, is think of your body and think of each emotion in your body as your children and treat them as such. Because really they are, right? They really are your children. They are your creation. You are birthing them and rebirthing them again and again, every morning, every moment. So, when we can have this point of view of like mothering our body and mothering our emotions, right? Then, yeah, sure, it starts to come into perspective a little more. Like, of course, yeah, there might be the sort of ruthless face of love, right? That says, enough with your tantrum, right? Now is not the time. I love it. There's no lack of love, right? But it's a boundary on that emotion, right? And then there's the very gentle face of love, right? And so it's a beautiful sort of framework that especially I find women really relate to. And it really shifts even women. I've been working with a client who was sort of stuck in an eating disorder, even though she had stopped the action of it, the mentality of it was still haunting her. And just this shift of just mother your body and mother every emotion is a child. And it was like, whoa, like her whole world has changed. Her inner dialogue has changed. Everything has shifted to being that voice and those eyes and those hands of love. So it's a powerful shift. So I gift that to you, Lexi, and to all the listeners. Yeah.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Soul Fam podcast. Be sure to tune into every episode where we dive into a different rabbit hole of the known and unknown to empower you in conscious living and exploration of the greater universe.
We hope you leave each episode with a little stardust in your hair and inspiration in your heart. With love from your soul fam.